Chapter 32. Captivity Day 29. Kali. The sensation from her stripes transitioned from an itch to an intense burning, but she felt a chill within her skull. "Where are the bathrooms?" Kali asked urgently. Shivar motioned to the far side of the room, beyond the buffet tables. "I'll be right back," she said to Maze as she stood and moved as swiftly as she could without running. They were finally making some progress in their discussion. Why now? She flung open the door and rushed inside. Kali grabbed onto the counter by the closest sink and stared into the mirror. Her brown stripes looked redder than usual, and her black stripes had a vague green tint. The center of the circular stripe on top of her head was starting to glow with a faint blue light. She could feel her pulse all throughout her body. She'd been ignoring the song of the Cletharian collective, but it had been there lurking deep within her psyche. Something was wrong. There was a new voice, discordant with the rest. How long had it been there? Was it Kayla? No, she saw Mari now. She focused on the counter melody and let the other verses fade. Long ago the river wild, overgrown, all left is mired. Kali recognized the words. It was the combination of the first half of two separate verses. She tried to match the resonance of their song and responded deep within her mind with the matching second halves. In time the bed near dried, our only hope a single child. She hoped that was the response they were looking for, although she didn't understand what it meant. The words and their meaning shifted frequently. At times she thought the child referenced was her, but this time she knew it wasn't. She felt like there was someone else in the bathroom with her, with their hand resting on her back. It was her sister, but it was only for a moment, but in that instant she knew the verse was talking about the baby weaver. She felt the next verse flowing through her. In the shadows the tree does sigh, preparing for the day to die. She was alone again. It was an unaltered verse, but what did it mean? What was the right answer and what would happen if she got it wrong? There were several references to shadows, only 2 verses mentioning trees. They'd already referenced one, so she took a chance and responded with the other in its earliest phrasing. A new bed laid, a new tree planted and guardian made. What do they want? Her mind reeled. I need my sister. Where is she? The reply was louder than all the others. Vibrant pulses of light flowed through her stripes, as if the intense power flowing through her was venting through her flesh. The weaver's dance was slowing, the seeds long planted now were growing. What in the powers? Those aren't verse fragments? Some of those words didn't exist in any iteration. There was a verse that spoke of 2 seeds hidden away, waiting for another day. There was only one other seed reference, but it didn't fit. Something had changed. Would the verses her sister gave her still work? Mari should be in surgery. Why had her sister self's presence vanished so quickly? Wait, weaving is mentioned several times. Was Sam the weaver? If the dance was slowing, preparing for the day to die, was Mari dying? She couldn't stand alone against the false queen. Kali searched for the words to respond, but they fled from her as her mind descended into darkness. Kali's mind reeled. The pulsation through her stripes intensified. She needed to calm down and get herself back under control. Sitting next to Shivar would sever her connection to the collective, but what would the consequences be? She needed one more line to complete the sequence. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply while trying to slow her pulse. She had so much power at her disposal, but what good was it? Kali and Sam were on opposite sides of the universe. There had to be something she could say to urge the Cletharians to help. The words flowed through her, but she wasn't entirely sure they were her own. Hurry now, for time is dear, the time has come for words to heal. The glow emanating from her stripes slowly faded away as she pulled her psyche away from the voice of the counter melody, allowing for the primary refrain to return to its usual whisper at the back of her mind. There was an odd comfort in being reconnected to the primary collective. Until today she hadn't known there were layers within their song, like the chambers within the nautiloid's shells. Kali would have to explore this later. Each of her tales was connected to a different weaver. Maybe that was the key to understanding what she'd just experienced. Both brown tails were connected to nautiloids near the Kalani link, but her black tail was connected to the one at the heart of the smaller fleet, which was nearing the coreward side of the nebula. When she focused on her pulse flowing through that tail, she could almost feel them. Kayla had called them darklings. They were hunting, but their thoughts were too primal for her to understand. The verse resonating through the thoughts of the others was the line which spoke of hunting. Hunters fall upon the meek, for all of life, death shall seek. Were the not real directing the others while they waited for her to guide their song? Here goes nothing, she muttered under her breath, or maybe everything. Only the children of the past can ensure salvation asked. For the time has come to pass, ancients walk through seas of glass. As worlds are linked to and fro, the eldest of the races go. She paused. She'd been directed to conclude with, when the last guardian stands alone, an empire is born of golden glow, but the reference to the birth of an empire troubled her. It just didn't feel right. She'd already started, she had to finish, but how? The verses blended and churned within her mind. As she struggled to find new meanings within the words, the devastated Midnight Fellowship worlds could serve them well as new homes for the species in their shells. Fuck, why am I rhyming? Cully snickered. Cully focused her thoughts on the fleet passing from the link to the Tetarn Gate to repopulate the Lao host region, then return home. Hopefully they'd understand. With cities burned and kingdoms smashed, link the future to the past. She sent a quick note to Ojaran to let him know what she tried directing the collective to do. Cully decided to actually use the restroom as intended before returning to the table. Gowrie. The Pygmy Karzon team had done a great job with getting the communication relay set up without being spotted by the Zynon hive. They could monitor most regional communications to keep Vakir's forces informed of enemy fleet movements. Dealing with their insectal neighbors was going to be a problem. They needed to lure them into the Carmel system, which was expected to cost the Admiral his life. His ship could take a beating, but it may not be enough. If they didn't lure the Zynon all the way into range of the Def Corp defense grid, they'll have wasted their best ship for nothing. Gowrie had made a few upgrades to the Kachina's stealth carrier before leaving. Just a short-range point defense system Tyrell had lying around, nothing major. It wasn't a warship. It was designed to be quick and maneuverable. The custom flight harness gave her enough control to outfly Tiaro, who practiced with Cletharians. It was a poor replacement for having wings, but allowed her to utilize all her avian instincts while piloting. They'd found a defense satellite with an 8-pack missile launcher among the base supplies. She considered installing it on her ship on a whim. It was disposable, but after firing once it would just be chaff, so she didn't see the point. It would throw off the ship's thrust ratio and wasn't compatible with the stealth system. It would at least break up the monotony. They were just here to watch. No outgoing signals were allowed until the fighting started. Tiaro's team had everything under control. At this point she was only here to help them evacuate if something went wrong. Unfortunately, they couldn't seem to get it through their heads that she wasn't in charge. They kept coming to her with status updates and asking what they should do. Gowrie desperately wished Tiara was here to deal with them. Once the fighting started, they could report directly to Hoeru and Vakir and stop bothering her. A Tanford, spotted pygmy carrying a stack of folders rushed up to her and said, "We received a message from No Name, the party planner. The disco ball is prepped for launch. He can start the party whenever we're ready." "He knows what he has to do," Gowrie squawked. "Why are you telling me? It's a coded message." "I thought it was important," the pygmy said defensively. "It's not a code just because you don't understand it," Gowrie scoffed. "If we don't understand, how will we know what's important?" he asked in dismay. "You have a list of the DEFCON commanders and their ships. You know the planets and systems where your people will be fighting. If it mentions anything on those lists, it's important." "What about neighboring systems like Havras, Kipruis, or Falair?" he asked. "Only if it sounds like they're planning to interfere, which is unlikely," Gowrie chirped. "Messages out of Havras may be important because of the slipstream. Just pay attention to what other system they mention. If I've never heard of the system before, it's safe to ignore," he nodded slowly. He must be a good tech but clearly didn't know how to think for himself. The Karzan had been used as an unwitting slave race for generations. Deferring to authority figures had become second nature. This mental conditioning had been broken for most members of the resistance, but they still had a hierarchy within their group. Unfortunately, Gowrie hadn't paid enough attention to know who to direct them to. She hated to admit she had problems telling them apart as it was. Just tell your immediate superior, Gowrie snapped. This is your revolution, not mine. TRO went missing a day before we could receive our final briefing, he complained. Nobody even told us there was going to be a party. Are we invited? It's a Cheshire party, Gowrie snapped. It's to prevent your enemy from receiving reinforcements from the Major system. Don't stress over it. He opened one of the folders and asked, what about this request for support sent to Havras? Was it sent from anywhere in the Karzan region? Gowrie asked irritably. No, he said nervously. The Vok area Starlink is too far to be an immediate concern, Gowrie bristled. Unless it's a system next to a Stargate, ignore it. Now will you stop bothering me with every stupid little thing? None of this matters to me. Is the Echelon system near a Stargate? He asked. Give me that, Gowrie said eagerly as she snatched the folder out of his hands. She read through the message log. It was a conversation between the sadistic monster that tore one of her wings off, Gowroon, and someone called Grax who was on the planet Echelon Gamma based on the routing information. It started with a summarized progress report. They'd made contact with a Lamentic woman named Akia who was willing to assist with mystic arts training for the E2 for a nominal fee and help with finding her a new guardian. Grax needed more funds delegated to Lady Darkseid's project in the area to pay her and hire a flight trainer. Gowrie flipped through the pages, pausing to search each for a single name. Grax had a lead on the location of Syntholo, but hadn't made contact yet. She clicked her beak as the papers fell from her hand. They found her Syntholo. All this time and she finally had her chance to be reunited with her beloved. I have to leave, Gowrie stammered. Your people are going to have to handle this without me. She ignored his pleas as she knocked him out of her way while rushing to her ship. Syntholo was out there just waiting to be found and she would be an ideal candidate for that flight trainer position. She could even maintain the equipment. She may have lost the wings on her back, but she felt like her heart was soaring. Xynon had a reputation for being superb pilots, second only to Cletharians. Rumor had it they were able to feel ripples in spacetime. If it was true, it would explain their uncanny ability to detect cloaked ships in their proximity. Gowrie suspected it was akin to her own avian instincts. The Xynon were born and lived in space, flitting around in their bioships. The Cletharians spent at least a portion of their lives inside weavers' shells. Maybe it was like comparing a flock of birds to a school of fish. Each is able to make minute changes in the currents, but birds need time to find a perch. The princess said these fish depend on the weavers they capture to guide the movements of the group. It must be like the lead fish guiding the movements of the school. Any Cletharian ship could guide the movements of a group, which must be why the Cletharians remained superior. They could adapt seamlessly, unlike their Minnow counterparts. Vakir was supposed to destroy the Weaver. The IS Starrunner X-42 was a sturdy ship, but how long could it last? She understood how to move with a flock. If she could sneak in with the Kachinas and get off a good shot on the Nautiloid's husk, Vakir would likely survive the day. It took just under a minute for her optimized jump drive to spool up. Once she entered jump space, the Xynon would be unable to follow. That should be enough to ensure the Karzan don't feel like she, and by extension Lady Darkseid, abandoned them. More importantly, it would let her take off to find Syntholo without having to wait for the fighting to end and not be delayed by the Cheshire Party fleet. Everyone should be in position. What's the harm in starting the fight a little earlier than planned? Gowrie went to work attaching the 8-pack missile launcher to her ship. She stuck it inside the loading bay so she could fire it from in there. It would give potential opponents a soft target, but as long as she got off her first shot, she should be able to drop the device's chaff and get it closed during the initial chaos. She needed a Vox Starlink access pass, and there was no way Tyrell would give her one unless she could provide him with a good excuse for her sudden departure. If this wasn't good enough for him, she'd just have to swallow her pride and contact Gao Rune. The golden light flooded through the room. Tyrell insisted it was red, but most full Karzon couldn't differentiate that shade. The pygmies insisted they could, but to him it was just the color of open flame. Someone had put the ship on high alert. This was no time for a drill. At least they were still running silent. If they made too much noise, the Xinan were likely to. Fakir snarled and rushed to the door of his room as he heard people sprinting down the hallway. They knew better. He flung the door open and stepped into the hallway with his claws clenched. "Sorry, Admiral," a blackish-furred Karzon said as they sped past him toward the gunnery deck. Fakir stormed down the hallway to the bridge. What in the powers was going on? Had they received some urgent message from the listening post, or had some idiot read the time wrong? "Explain now," he growled as he strode onto the battle bridge. "The Kachinas just fired at the Xinan Nautilus bioship." "Damage report," Fakir snapped. "They're running." "Light damage so far," Subcommander Seaver answered swiftly. "Not the crazy bird, the Xinan command ship," Fakir said. "Crippled but not destroyed," Seaver said swiftly. He studied the main screen while walking to the command chair. The Xinan hive fighters were trying to swarm the Kachinas. Their command ship was completely exposed and vulnerable. "Line up the spinal mass driver with that Nautilus and prepare to fire. She's given us an opening. Take it. Let everyone know we're going in hot. Once we crack that beast open, drive the rest toward Horu's group. Make sure he knows they're coming. Try to make an opening for the Kachinas to get clear, but we want as many of those little bugs ships in Carmel as we can," Fakir instructed. "The longer Def Corp focuses their fire on those Xinan ships, the more time Horu's team will have to carve through their ranks." The ship labored to maintain its speed. The force from the city spire-sized cylinder propelled from the end of the spinal-mounted mass driver pushed back against their forward thrust. The sound and vibration of the next round shifting into place passed through the ship. The Starrunner X-42 was designed to carry up to 5 of these massive rounds. There were only 2 on board when Fakir had taken control of the vessel. The volume of metals required to replace a single round was absurd. They'd only been able to fabricate 1 additional round, at the cost of 10 less slasher ships for the battle to come. They could only use their most devastating weapon 2 more times, leaving them dependent on their banks of beam weapon turrets. It would take just over a minute for the massive slug to impact with the enemy command ship from this range. They prepared their secondary weapons to fire to keep the crippled ship pinned down in the event it started moving again, while the low-power auxiliary weapons fired at their fighter ships as the Starrunner lumbered onto the battlefield. "We have their attention," Seaver said urgently. "Roughly a fifth of their forces have turned to engage us." "Keep them distracted until impact," Fakir roared. "Keep driving them forward while giving our Blackbird some room to spread her wings." "Admiral," one of the other officers called out, "Kachinas is nearing medium hull damage. Stealth subsystems are inoperable. Send all reports to the subcommander's console for prioritization," Fakir scolded as he watched the screen counting down the time until impact. Lady Darkseid's man Tyrell had really outdone himself. The Xinan fighter profiles looked almost identical to the Resistance slasher ships on mid-range scanners. Hopefully they'd be just as hard to tell apart on short-range sensors, but only time would tell. Each slasher was equipped with one of those DefCorp devices that protected them from friendly fire. The slashers were designed to slash into the hulls of enemy ships. Their light beam weapons could target Xinan ships, but not the Carmel fleet, and the DefCorp ships wouldn't be able to target them unless they disabled their friendly fire target. Lock inhibitors. The Xinan would serve as a smoke screen, buying his forces time to whittle down the enemy forces before they realized why their weapons couldn't lock on. It was a solid strategy but untested on the battlefield. The projectile tore through the enemy Nautilus. "We're detecting an energy spike from the Kachinas," Seaver said. "It looks like their jump drive is preparing for activation." "Heat it up until they're clear," Fakir ordered. He sent a quick message to Gowrie. Today you took a risk jumping off your safe branch. You spread your wings and sculpted the winds for us. I am in your debt. May the savannah winds guide you and the Kachinas safely on your way. It was the combination of an expression from her people and his own. No statues for me, Fakir muttered. Not today. The Starrunner X-42 routed the disoriented Zynon forces, herding them toward the border of the Carmel system where Horror's forces waited to drive them into the war zone. Hero. Acid. TRO said in horror. I said and Hero. Acid. TRO said in horror. I said antacid, Beta said angrily. It's gas. Just like it was yesterday. I swear I felt something moving, TRO objected. Still gas, Beta rolled her eyes. You've been pregnant for 2 days. It will be months before you can feel anything in there. If your abdomen feels tight and something feels like it's moving at this point, it's gas or poop. Are you sure? TRO asked nervously. Maybe you're developing a knack and your first ability is manifesting, Beta said sarcastically. Wow, what kind of ability could it be? Roan paused just on the other side of the doorway, smirked and said, just ignore her. Pashai loves screwing with people. No, I'm serious this time, Beta said with a sly grin. Gas generation, right? Roan smirked. Both of the guys that sleep in the bunk room were in here earlier, Beta giggled. Tiaras are more of a death cloud. Why are you so mean to me? Tiara whimpered. Just take the damn antacid and meet me downstairs in 5 minutes, Roan rumbled. Better make it 10, Beta chortled, just for safety's sake. I don't want her melting through one of the airlock doors. Dizzy is waiting too, Roan said irritably. You should have started with that, Beta said apologetically. I'll give her the good stuff and send her right down. TRO was directed to drink a vial of fluid. Beta laid a heating pad across the table and instructed her to lay down, then jumped onto the examination table and massaged TRO's stomach until she expelled a large gas bubble. I feel better now, TRO said meekly. Good, Beta said tersely. Now get your fuzzy ass downstairs. Beta jumped off the table as TRO sat up and slid off the table. Can I borrow the heating pad? TRO asked. Go ahead, Beta shrugged. The power cell needs to be recharged every 6 hours. Just do yourself a favor and don't run it down completely. TRO made her way downstairs, took a seat at the far end of the table, and draped the heating pad over her stomach. Feeling better? Roan asked. TRO nodded. You said you lived near Clotharians, Desiree said with a flat effect. TRO nodded again. While we've been waiting here, they've been transmitting the same signal over and over. Hunters fall upon the meek. For all of life death shall seek, Roan added. Dizzy glanced over at the captain before continuing. They started a different sequence while returning to the link. I'm hoping you can tell us if we should be concerned. Maybe, TRO shrugged. When I was around Shelley, I used to get vague impressions. I can try. This isn't just us asking, Roan cut in. The Mercantile Port Authority at Jahar has received conflicting reports. Those ships are heading from the Kailani link to the Tetarn Gate using, well, we don't know. The event horizon is green for Starlinks and blue for Stargates. They did something. Dizzy continued. The last transmission they sent on this end was, with cities burned and kingdoms smashed, link the future to the past. The first message our listening post picked up on the other side started the same but ended differently. Every ship passing through has sent the signal once, then gone silent. We're hoping you'll know what that means. I think they're waiting until all the mollusks are in the same place, TRO said. I've only seen it once before. The event horizon has no color, Roan said, then corrected herself. Well, it does, but only Dizzy can see it. What did they say on the other side? TRO asked in confusion. Dizzy pushed down a button on the table. With cities burned and kingdoms smashed, borders between the realms collapse, sounded from a speaker in the ceiling. Dizzy, the last group of ships is passing through now, Audie's voice said over the ship intercom. Maxim wants to know how much longer you want him to keep the feed active? Just a little longer, Dizzy replied. He also wanted to remind you to ask Roan to call him when she wakes up, Audie said. Tro giggled quietly into her hand at the disgusted look on the captain's face. I will, Desiree said with a crooked grin. Did she say ask? A gruff male voice said over the remote feed. Promises were made. And this is why I'm in charge of communications, Dizzy sighed. Audie, make sure to flip the third switch before you talk. Sorry, Audie laughed. At least he can only hear me. Roan opened her mouth to speak but was silenced by Dizzy. Audie, on the second row are switches 5 and 8. Are they up or down? Down, Audie said. It's safe, Captain, Dizzy chuckled. It wasn't important, Roan grumbled. They sat in silence as the Cletharian messages flowed through the speaker as the final group of ships arrived at their destination. With cities burned and kingdoms smashed, borders between the realms collapse. Leaving forward each strand cast, words once spoken turned to ash. All these things have come to pass, linking the future to the past. When does break the final seal, shatter shall the magic sphere. That's new, Tiara whispered. Colmians? What the fuck? Maxim's voice screamed over the connection. Why are there Colmians? We lost connection with the listening post, Audie said over the intercom. I can't reconnect. I have the feeling you're not going to have to call Maxim, Dizzy said sadly. I hope he's dead, Roan said emotionlessly. Is Maxim really that bad? Roan shivered as she lowered her head and breathed slowly. Dizzy placed her hand on top of Roan's head. Take some time. I'll educate our guest. Desiree turned and walked briskly over to Tio, grabbed her by the scruff of her neck and guided her up the stairs. Come with me. You're going to learn about Colmians. The systems controlled by the Midnight Fellowship today were once part of the former Colmian Empire. Their nation wasn't defeated and didn't go into decline. They just vanished one day, leaving their cities fully intact. Plates, bowls, and glasses still on their tables. They were just gone and nobody knew how or why. Younger races which had been used as thralls ran the Colmian war machine for years, while younger indigenous species slowly took control of the region from within. Colmians were once regarded as the most powerful psionic species. How much of the stories are true? Who knows, but records indicate they had the ability to completely override a person's loyalties and rewrite their personality. That's why Roan had said she hoped Maxim was dead. The alternative was far worse. Louis. Louis. The Sam was nice to him. Made him feel strong. She protected him but had to leave him in strange place. But the song from the reaching animal kept him calm whenever the shadows without a source startled him. They moved all the time but nobody else seemed to see them. They whispered always but nobody else could hear. He pretended their words could not reach him until he heard them. Whispering about the Sam being in danger. He wanted to help the Sam protect the Sam. So he followed them into the mouth of the reaching animal, curled up and hid, surrounded by shadows as it brought him to another place inside the pretty clouds. His head felt bigger inside the reaching animal until it wrapped around a shining object and the shadows made him a path to a door. The animal sang inside his head to keep him calm as he followed the path of light the shadows made for him, leading him down passages with walls stained orange. The path ended in a round room with large chair in the center. The thing in the chair was covered in shadows which moved with it. It smelled like it was rotting. The flesh had been eaten away from its bones. 6 rotting tentacles hung from the front of its skull. Thick cables connected to the bottom of the chair. He was frightened and confused. The song he could hear inside his head grew louder, soothing him as a new voice spoke into his ears. We will teach you all you must know, Louis. In exchange, we will use your mind's connection to the Sam to guide us to her. The meaning of their words slowly solidified within his mind, as his understanding slowly deepened. Cyberop Gregor's ship began to move, leading the Cletharian fleet to the Pilth Stargate. Louis's understanding continued expanding as they traveled. Shelley slowly consumed the vessel, incorporating it into her mutation core-modified physiology. Samari's psyche was being restrained by an enormous Cynon hive in the Fernib star system, and the Horde intended to overthrow an empire if they continued to prevent their passage. Nelfrey. What happened? Nelfrey wondered. She'd lost patience before, but not like that, and this time it was personal. She was wandering around in a haze. The procedure went flawlessly. Delula had been very careful and even asked Nelfrey to double-check her work after each step of the procedure. Everything had to be flawless, and it was. The neural bridges to the alien organ matched the scans from Dr. Thallo precisely, but when they deactivated the neural inhibitor, nothing. There was brain activity, but the readings were wrong and Samari just wouldn't wake up. They killed Lady Darkseid. Her body seemed functional, but she was gone. Nelfrey hadn't even stopped to say hello to Kiryu before leaving Club 9th. She just couldn't face her. She couldn't face anyone, not even herself. She just left. Wandered out the front door and just kept walking. No bleeders, not even a drop tool. It was an unusual procedure, but it went flawlessly. Did she bruise the alien gland? Maybe it had been damaged before it was even put into cryogenic storage. Nelfrey wasn't sure where she was or how far she'd walked. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It just kept playing through her mind over and over again without missing even the tiniest detail. There were fewer and fewer people the further she walked. She was only a weak empath, but skilled enough to help keep patients calm. She couldn't focus at all. She didn't even flinch at the sound of distant gunfire, or the screams that followed. It was nothing for her to be concerned with, probably just a group of hazard tourists. Down here in. Wait, why am I in Blade's Edge? Nelfrey's head began to clear. She had made it all the way to the parking lot facing the east gate. There was a car idling about a dozen feet away. The window rolled down partway. She could see white-furred, pointed ears poking up above the darkly tinted glass. You look lost, a male voice said from inside the car. She couldn't place it but knew she'd heard it before. Come here, the man said. Let me give you directions. She felt a faint tingling sensation at the nape of her neck. It wasn't breezy, but the feeling was the same. She walked over to the car in a dreamlike state. You need this, they said as they held the end of a data chip through the slender window opening. Nelfrey took it without questioning. It's a good night for a walk, the man's voice seemed to echo in her head as he spoke. You should pick some flowers that only grow on the other side of that gate over there. I've never walked outside the east gate, Nelfrey said in a distant tone. She finally placed the voice. It belonged to Dr. Smith. You've had a hard day, Ernst said more forcefully. You deserve a nice leisurely walk. Yes, I do, Nelfrey said quietly as she turned and walked away from the car. She was too focused on the gate to pay attention to the sound of the car backing up and speeding away. Kinji. The salvage ship Atraxia 973 waited within the border zone between the Carmel and Jaren regions. 16 days ago, Shinji had left the Kirame array. After floating powerless for a while, he'd been rescued by the crew of this ship. Tyrell has refused any contact with Shinji since his recovery. Captain Mel had been told where to find Shinji and asked to put him to work. The crew didn't seem to like him much. They spent days arguing over whether he was flotsam or jetsam, but either way he and what was left of his ship were just more space junk and would be until he either paid off his salvage fee or proved his worth. His job as the new ship telepath was to use his psionic abilities to search hulks for the minds of any survivors and report on their mental state. It was a dangerous business, and his job was to make sure they weren't walking into a trap whenever they had to board a derelict ship. Captain Mel used cheap pink dye on her blonde hair. It had faded quite a bit over the 12 days he'd been on her ship. She was very young to be captaining a ship like this. On a cursory glance she seemed well respected by the crew. Being telepathic, Shinji knew better. She had been the technician on their old ship, the 972. She'd rehired most of the old crew when she was provided with a replacement, the 973. The current crew treated Mel like she was their kid sister. It would have saved Shinji a lot of pain if he'd realized this before getting a beat down for trying to flirt with her 2 days after he'd woken up. They were worried Shinji might use his abilities to manipulate the captain. Unfounded or not, it was a valid concern. They didn't know him and hadn't been given a reason to want to. The last 3 days had been incredibly stressful. Tyrell had instructed Shinji and Mel to review the plans for the upcoming battle. They were to be helping find Allied survivors and salvage what they could from enemy ships. There were some unpleasant matters to deal with as well. Tyrell was clear the remaining Karzon were to assist with exterminating any Def Corp personnel that survived the battle. Shinji understood that the Karzon had been used for target practice while conducting prototype combat testing for generations. They had legitimate reasons to be outraged at their treatment over the centuries, but was committing war crimes really the best way to declare your independence? This had to be Kali's influence. He couldn't imagine Tyrell would issue an order like that. Lady Darkseid had sent the Cletharians to kill millions of Loctarians for executing Jake, and she was sacrificing an innocent Xynon colony to help the Karzon kill hundreds of Def Corp employees that were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. That woman was a menace. He was ashamed of the fact he'd once cared for her. They'd spent days using the long-range scanners to profile each ship in the system defense fleet. They scouted for potential salvage before the battle even began. The crew were hoping some of the ships fell in combat. They were so focused on the value of the parts, they hadn't stopped to consider the lives that would be lost. The crew cheered and jeered as they watched a tactical display being projected on a whitewashed wall on one side of the mess hall. Each defender was tagged with a list of parts they hoped they'd be able to salvage. It was ghoulish even if the battle was fated. It would only take a few hours for Def Corp to assemble a fleet on the Due Star side of the slipstream and pummel whatever remained of the Karzon fleet. The Major system was 2 stars coreward from Jaren. The Cheshire fleet from Falair might stop them from assisting the Carmel forces for now, but space is 3-dimensional. Certainly they could find some way around it. Even if the revolution took the system, Shinji didn't see how they could keep it. It was just a matter of time until... Looks like our team is winning, Mel said happily. DEFCON is getting desperate. I just heard they tried calling Jaren for assistance. A little late. Jaren and Major are both a full jump day away. I bet their parent company is regretting putting the Pilf Stargate in maintenance mode now. There's still the slipstream, Shinji said. It's blockaded, Mel laughed. Even if it wasn't, it would take them hours to. Well, that's fun. A contingent of ships had just appeared on the screen behind the Major fleet, which had been holding position near the Cheshire Party fleet. It looked like the vessels that had just joined and had ambushed the main DEFCON assault fleet from Major. They were trying to change course to put their backs to the Cheshire Party fleet. They couldn't move forward or retreat. One of the crew members walked to the edge of the wall to get a closer look. Those are Mercmarine hunter-killers. What are they doing here? No idea, Mel said while eyeing Shinji. You know anything about this? Not a clue, Shinji admitted. I'll check with Tyrell, Mel said as all the regional relay satellites went offline. What happened? That's not on our end. The crew grumbled unhappily as they returned to their posts. The show was over. Shinji stayed and waited quietly until everyone else, other than Mel, had left. Mind if I ask you a question? Shinji asked nervously. As long as you don't ask me if there's another way to work off what you owe, right after asking if I'm legal. Again, she answered with a wry smile. I really didn't mean it that way, Shinji objected. Listen, you needed a telepath, but nobody wants me here. Tyrell does, Mel interrupted. I don't know what you did over there, but he said this is your one chance to redeem yourself. After this run, if you want to throw away this opportunity, I'll dump you off at any port in the area. What about Hyrule? Shinji asked. Except that one, Mel smirked. Shinji scowled. Just take some time and think it over, Mel urged. You have no money, no job prospects, and a chance to pick up new skills. You could have a future here. You just need to earn it.